to redeem us in the midst of our wickedness, and to cleanse us, and to make us holy. Please help us to study this word, Father, and as a result, strive to be holy as you are, and to be obedient to the faith that you call us to have. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I want us to say together the primary verse here, the core of Romans, which is verses 16 and 17. So if you would, say it with me. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. I definitely hope if you don't know it now, you'll know it very soon and have that memorized. That's a very, very powerful passage. And so when we talk about God's righteousness, how is God's righteousness revealed? Through his creation, okay. The what? Through Jesus, the living word. Someone help us out and just look at what we just spoke. Think about what we just spoke. How is the gospel revealed? I just gave it away. His righteousness is revealed in the gospel. That's why Paul's not ashamed, right? He said, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed. So how do we obtain God's righteousness? According to Paul. Again, not a trick question. You can call it out. It's what we just read. Through faith. Through faith in the gospel. That's how we obtain his righteousness. So one thing we all ought to ask ourselves, Paul emphatically said, I am not ashamed of the gospel. Are we ashamed of the gospel? I would hope not, and I would say that you can't get to the happy ending until you go through the messy beginning. And we can't understand the awesomeness of the good news without really first acknowledging the really bad stuff. And what I find very interesting is how Paul, I'm going to go back for a minute, what Paul says here, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And we're going to read in just a second the following statement. And what I want to do, Mike Rika has agreed to read verses 16 through the end of chapter 1. And I want you to pay particular attention to the transition Paul makes in verse 18. Paul says this beautiful statement, right? I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Why? Because it's the means of salvation. The righteousness of God's been revealed. And the righteous shall live by faith. It's such a positive message. But notice how he just switches gears, it seems like, instantly in verse 18. So, Mike, if you would, go ahead and read for us. Is the microphone on?
Testing.
All right, hold on. It doesn't work there?
Testing.
Okay, back to the first one.
The
power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore, God gave them over to the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever, and amen. For this reason, God gave them over to the degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desires toward one another, men with men, committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So what I want to do tonight and Wednesday is really look at three different things. The first I want to look at is what God's righteousness is compared to in man's condition. Okay, we'll look at that very briefly, and then really want to delve into man's condition as described by Paul here. And then from there, I really want to look at some practical application. Like, what are some things? I don't want to go reading this and just have a rah session, because if you read chapter 2, that's what Paul said the Jews were going to have when they read this. A rah, yeah, you nail it, Paul. Society's corrupt. Gentiles are bad. That's too easy of an out. And I want us to think about, just get some food for thought there. So, why do we need God's righteousness? And why is faith required to obtain it? Now, please raise your hand, and then we'll have a microphone brought to you. Why do we need, we come off verse 16 and 17, the righteousness of God's revealed. And after he has that beautiful passage, he says, for the wrath of God. And it's just interesting, the big transition there. So, does anybody want to jump in? Why is the righteousness of God required? Okay, Derek?
You're looking for foundational principles, and man has spent his time ignoring God and saying we can do this ourselves, whether it is historically pagan religions, or whether it's Marxism, or whether it's the reason of the French Revolution, or whether it's today's basis for subjectivism, or even Gnosticism. Mankind has always looked outside, or always looked to themselves, when they've left God. And when there's not that, then there is wrath, because we don't have a foundational principle of starting with God. And the only answer to that is God's righteousness.
Okay. So, do we have any... go ahead.
Well, with that, just the parallelism, we're told the righteousness of God is revealed, and then the wrath of God is revealed against not some unrighteousness. The list that follows isn't all-inclusiveness. The wrath of God is against all unrighteousness, not some, and that leaves all of us in a heap of trouble. So that's why we need.
Very good. So mankind, we try to do some works. What do our works earn? It doesn't just earn nothing. I wish it would just earn nothing. It's a bit worse than that. Death and the wrath of God. Our efforts earn God's wrath. Because we fall short, we're unrighteous. We have nothing, we have no righteousness to offer to Him, right? And you look, do the Gentiles have any hope of giving God their lives and saying, Lord, here's my life. I'm going to offer this to you as a sacrifice. Is there any hope of that meaning anything to God? You shake your head no. Does God want a twisted, distorted, broken life? That's not a suitable sacrifice for a holy God. So, we have to get God's righteousness. Like Derek was saying, if we want righteousness, we've messed it up. We're already messed up. We've ruined it. There's no obtaining it by ourselves. We have to get it from God. Why by faith? Well, what have our works earned us? They've earned us His wrath. So now we're going to have to turn to God and trust Him. Trust Him to provide us something, to put something in our bank account that's been devastatingly, the balance has gone way negative, right? And so Paul begins here with the state of the Gentiles, but he's going to move quickly, which we're not going to get to in this lesson tonight or Wednesday, but he's going to move to the Jews and say, hey, you're no better off. Don't look just at the Gentiles, you're no better off. And then he's going to sum everything up and say, everybody is in the same predicament, right? So this is all part of explaining why we need the righteousness of God, which if you don't explain that and don't understand that, then the beauty of the gospel, it can't be understood. You've got to understand and accept it, accept the situation that we're really in. Okay, so Paul's main point. We need God's righteousness because we don't have any, right? This is the main gist he's going to carry on through chapter 3, verse 20. And Paul begins here with Gentiles' sinful state, but he moves on quickly in chapter 2 to show the spiritual state that's just as bad for the Jews. And here's a big summary here. Mankind, if you look at the language of Paul, mankind has chosen war with God. Therefore, God's wrath has been revealed. And it's interesting, there's some bookends here, a lot of bookends in the book of Romans. You have God's wrath being revealed in verse 18. You go to chapter 5, and it says, now we have peace with God because of the faith through Christ. So these are just good bookends to watch for. Man's at war with God, we have wrath. And what we're trying to get to is righteousness so we can have peace with God. And the only way to get that is getting it from God Himself. Okay. Pardon me. So, Paul explains how bad off the Gentiles are. Are they innocent in this? Were they just like waking up one morning and they find themselves in this terrible condition? And they really, man, I just didn't intend to be here, but here I am. No excuse. They're without excuse. why would the Gentiles be without excuse? God's revealed himself. Someone, you want to go ahead? Bring the microphone over here if you would. Raise your hand if you could so they can get the microphone to you.
God's revealed himself through the things that he has made. And backing up, Jeremiah 10:23 says, "Oh God," the weeping prophet says, "Oh God, I know that it's not within man to direct his steps." There's only one righteousness that gets us out of the wrath of God, and that's the righteousness of God by the authority of God.
Okay.
And the Gentiles are just as guilty because God has revealed himself through the things that he has made.
So if the Gentiles have God's righteousness or God himself revealed to them, how did they end up in this totally debauched and corrupt state? Again, did they just wake up and haplessly wander into it? I'm going to give these guys exercise here. Hand out the microphone.
I mean, it kind of comes from a failure to recognize the righteousness. It says that it's clearly seen. All of these, the divine nature, the holy power that God has is clearly seen, but it's not recognized, it's not understood, and therefore it's not counted to them for righteousness because they fail to recognize who's in control.
Okay. And there's also here that it is a failure to recognize God. In the verses here, verses 20 through 23, it seems like there's this downward spiral that man finds himself in, the Gentile nation. What does it start with in verse, verse 18? For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What's the beginning? Down here, with Elizabeth?
I mean, I think they're doing did what we do all the time. We don't see truth right in front of our face because it's not the answer we wanted. Because we don't have any power in that. The power is God's. And if that doesn't make sense with the story that I want, because I want some agency or some righteousness, then I'm going to create this other God that I can control.
Okay. Is that ignoring of the truth or not seeing the truth? Is that a passive thing according to Paul?
No, I mean, they knew that thing they made didn't create them.
Right. The word he uses here is suppress, right? They suppress the truth. They know it. It's right in front of their face. It's been revealed in multiple ways, and they kind of push that to the side. I don't like that. So they push that to the side. What about their attitude? We call it attitude of gratitude, right? Do y'all think thankfulness is an important thing? Do we have to teach our kids to be thankful? Yeah? He says that though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. They just decided, you know what? I know who you are. I know what you're about. I don't really like that. I'm going to push that to the side. In no way am I going to be thankful to you for anything I have. I'm not going to look to you for that. And what's the end result of both of those things? They became fools, right? Their thinking, what happens to their thought process? Is it productive? Does it go somewhere good? What's that? Corrupt? Yeah. Futile. Their thought process becomes futile. They're trying to get somewhere, but they're really getting nowhere. And so their futile hearts Their thinking's futile, their hearts are darkened, and then the end result is they're free of God, right? They're free of a God, right? Are they free of a God? Who becomes their God? Themselves, bugs, animals. You have this incorruptible, immortal God. Don't like him. I'm going to get a God that's going to decay and get real stinky and corrupt and nasty. I'll go after these slithering things rather than the real God. It's a picture of insanity, isn't it? A picture of just absolute corruption at its core, rejecting anything good. So, we talked a little bit about God revealed himself. What did the Gentiles know? What did they know? Someone raise your hand and talk about how God has revealed himself to them. Anybody? Elizabeth?
I mean, they knew they didn't lift the sun up in the sky that day. They knew that they did not create life, even though they might have been confused about what actually created life. But there are these basic things that you know, this strength didn't come from you. There's something else out there. And whether they didn't follow the trail or ignored it, I don't know. But they knew they didn't make this that they were living in.
Right. They knew there was something powerful outside of themselves. What else did God say was evident to all of them? Eternal power and divine nature. So his eternal power, his divine nature, you look outside, you see the glory of what's been created. You know it's been created. Atheism that we see today, that's a pretty new phenomenon. That was not in existence since the beginning of time. Everyone believed in something as the motive force behind what we see today. So his eternal power, and it says also his divine nature, right? His eternal power, divine nature are clearly perceived. So can we get from creation itself that there's only one God? Does creation tell us that? You think creation itself, by itself, looking at it, will say there's one single God? Okay, so bring the microphone down here. Why would you say, well, explain to us in brief, obviously. We can't go through a big...
That sounds like a Buddy Payne treatise to me. But the things that God created are so miraculous and evident. Someone has to say, who did that? What did that? You know, just sight and speech and hearing. Those human features are so miraculous and wonderful. They don't just happen. You got to think there is something bigger than me that created all this wonderfulness that we see.
Okay, definitely. I mean, I would agree with you. You look out there, you say, there's something bigger, more powerful than me that has created all this. I think you can get that from looking out there. But could you necessarily say there's only one God from looking at it? Is that an obvious result of looking at creation? I see a maybe. Go ahead, Rich.
We're searching for a unified theory today. There is continuity between everything we see. In today's world, the evolutionist looks at it and they go, oh, well, this all came from one creature. But the unity of design does point to a designer of sorts, it seems.
That definitely points, I'd agree with you, points to designer. I would say it's probably a stretch, though, to say that it guarantees you by looking at creation that you can come to the conclusion that there's a one single God. I'd say you see unity for sure, that whoever the designer or designers were unified in their purpose. We got Sean, I think, and then Lori.
I was just going to say that through nature we can see his eternal power, but we can't know his will. We cannot know who that God is just through seeing nature. We can know he exists and we can seek him, but we need more to find him.
Okay. And Lori?
Okay, and how nature works together perfectly, to me that shows one God. You couldn't have multiple gods doing all this perfectly together.
Okay, so that could be an argument that's made.
It's order. There's order. The world wants you to believe that order came from disorder right now. You know, that order came from chaos, Big Bang. Everything came into existence. We know that doesn't make logical sense. That's how we know there's one God. But the gentleman up there is absolutely right. You know, that's why Paul told the Athenians that God expects us to know he's there and to seek him, that they should seek God. Though he's not very far from every one of us. Well, how do we know he's not? We can look and see him. He's out there, even in the 100-degree heat.
So yeah, I think, one more comment here.
I agree with you, Bill. I think that objectively, if you suspend your knowledge of the scriptures, if you're looking at this purely objectively with your eyes and looking at creation, I think it's logical to assume that there could be a multiple God system. I think that the power of the ocean and the power of the sun and the power of the wind, if you're uneducated, if you don't know the truth, it's pretty reasonable to conclude that those could be separate entities, separate forces. I do think that makes sense.
Okay. Steve?
In Genesis, Adam and Eve spoke to the I am. That's how we know.
Okay. So I agree that the most logical conclusion looking at creation is that there is a single God. But I'll tell you why I believe that. It's because I was told that, and then I looked at creation and said, you know what? It lines up with what I've just been told. Is creation the only revelation that God has given to all of mankind, even Gentiles? So, call out some ways that God has revealed himself through time to the Gentiles, outside of just nature itself. Someone said the Bible. Well, I don't think the scriptures were written to all the different nations. I'm talking about like at the time Paul's writing. Eric?
The flood or the plagues that were on Egypt?
Okay, the flood or the plagues. The plagues is a perfect one, right? Did God reveal himself with a mighty arm to the Egyptians? Absolutely. Did other nations hear about this great God because of what was done in Egypt? Yeah, we can think about Rahab, right? She heard about it, and it caused her to have faith. How else? He spoke. Like, through whom?
He's spoken to people. He's used his voice.
Okay.
As a thundering sound. And people who were not his people have heard it. And they have been there present and acknowledged that there was a voice booming like thunder.
Very good. When Abraham was called out by God, called out to go to a land God was going to show him, was Abraham the only one God was speaking to at that time? Can y'all think of a name of a person who's we don't know a lot about? It's really mysterious. And Melchizedek. Melchizedek was a priest of what? The Most High God. You had Melchizedek. When Moses fled from Egypt, did he just go into, he went somewhere where he didn't know. He went into somebody's tent, with a family. The father of that family was a what? Was a priest of God. Interesting. Jethro, right? You have Balaam. Did God speak to Balaam? He did. Balaam didn't stay wholehearted toward God. But you have Balaam, you got Jonah, you have Daniel who testified to the Babylonians. You have Obadiah. You have all these various prophets that didn't just prophesy to the people of God, the chosen people. These nations were without excuse. Before God was about to destroy Nineveh, he sent Jonah. He told them who he was and what he wanted from them. God left them without excuse. Derek?
Just great points. And
Get a microphone here.
those are the ones that we're told about. Those are the ones that we have record.
Right.
If we have record of those, then most likely there were many, many more that were not necessarily to be kept in Scripture to tell us about.
Very good. Those are the ones. Those are the only ones we know about. Yep.
Wars.
What?
All the wars.
All the wars?
Yes. I mean, all the countries Israel's going to battle with, and they're winning with small numbers, and everyone talked about it. Like they have a God. He's powerful.
Very good. So that brings up another great point. I wish I'd thought ahead to put a map up of where Israel was located. It was located at the crossroads of trade between big nations. That's where God placed Israel. Do you think that was just by chance that God chose that land for them? No. God put them there because he wanted them to be a shining light, a city on a hill, where when people went up, they're supposed to go up there and say, "Where's your God? I don't see him anywhere." And the people are supposed to respond, "We don't have a God that's made an image. Our God has created all things, and man is made in his image. And we worship the holy God, the one God who's in control of everything." Do y'all remember who came to visit Solomon? The Queen of Egypt came, right, to visit Solomon? And she had heard about him and his God. Gentiles are without excuse. They have the knowledge of God. They have the revelation. I want to show you an image here that I want to, hopefully you can see it. Can y'all see this? Yeah. So I stole this image from Answers in Genesis. I like it a lot. I'm just going to take a quick aside. We're not going to delve into this a lot, but Gentiles knew God because God revealed himself to them. Not just by nature. Nature testified and backed up what was already revealed, but he gave a revelation. And to get away from the revelation, or to get away from the truth, they suppressed the revelation. And this is a great image. Answers in Genesis, for any of you guys know, is an organization that really tries to focus on the foundational bedrock of our faith, which starts in the book of Genesis. Genesis is a real history. And what they're showing here is what happens a lot of times when we are trying, when Christendom at large is trying to fight culture. What they do is they target individual issues. Oh, we're going to stand against gay marriage. Oh, we're going to stand against abortion. Oh, we're going to stand against whatever. And we're going to fight that issue. Not bad things. They're not saying those are bad things. But they take their eye off the ball. They're fighting the issues. What is the enemy fighting? They're fighting the foundation, which is God's revealed will. The enemy is targeting whether God's word is really divine, right? They're targeting, Genesis, that's not really history. That's just metaphor. That's just a metaphor. You don't have to believe that. We know by science, evolution, people have been around for millions and millions of years. You hear that over and over and over. How many people hear that a lot? Can you guys watch many kids' movies without that message being interjected? No. The enemy is attacking the foundation of whether God really revealed himself, trying to get us to question that. And what Paul shows is once you turn away from the foundation of revelation, what happens? Chaos. Anything goes. I just love this image here. So, all right, here's another statement that I found. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll read it to you. During the French Revolution, an atheist boasted that he would destroy God's presence. I think it was a situation where he's torturing somebody, some Christian. So I'm going to destroy God's presence. We're going to kill all the Christians. We're going to burn all the Bibles. We're going to tear down their cathedrals. And the guy who was feeling the wrath of that said, when you finish with that, you'll need to climb up and put out the sun, the moon, and the stars, because they too are witnesses of God. Thought that was, I don't know the truth of that statement or not. I don't know who it was ascribed to. But we know that we not only have God's revealed will, we have the testimony of nature there, so that man is without excuse. Okay, a little bit further into the Gentile condition. When you turn away from the light, what do you turn toward? Not light, darkness. It's a great picture to have. When you turn away from the author of life, what do you turn toward? Death. Is it any wonder why those who are so opposed to Christianity in today's culture are so pro-abortion, are so pro all kinds of things that lead to destruction and death? Is it any wonder? You turn away from the author of life, there's only one option. It's death. Turn away from light, all you can go toward is darkness. That's it. Is there any wisdom apart from God? If you want to call man's wisdom, wisdom. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. Most of you probably know it by heart. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now let me ask this, and we're jumping around a little bit in this segment here, but we're going to get back to some application in just a moment. Do the people Paul's talking about here, do they stop with just saying, well, for me, I'm going to do this? Do they stop on a personal level with sinning? What does Paul say? They approve others who do it. Yeah, verse 32, he says, they not only do them, but get approval to those who practice them. Is Paul talking about innocently, naively misled people here? There's no naivety here. People have embraced this. Okay. So, what's God's response? We know it's his wrath, but then how does God respond when people have suppressed the truth? They've had a heart of ingratitude, and they've decided to not abandon worship altogether, because man can't do that. Man can't abandon worship, no matter how hard he tries. We just cloak it in different words. But they begin to worship the creature rather than the creator. How is God's wrath revealed? What does he do? Gives them up. Gives them up to their own passions. Verse 24, what do they start doing? Dishonoring their bodies, doing unnatural things with their bodies. Verse 26, they have dishonorable passions. Verse 28, they have a debased mind. Is God's response to give people up and to answer them with his wrath and give them up? And basically, I get the picture, he takes his hands off of them. Says, okay. Is that a fair response? Do you see God here just chopping heads off instantly? God made the rules. What? Right. That's a good one for especially chapter 9, right? When Paul talks about that. But I think all of us can see that this is eminently fair if people say, you know what? I don't want that. And God says, okay, have what you want. You may not like what you get, but I'll give you exactly what you're looking for. So, go ahead.
C.S. Lewis says that there's two groups of people. one to which people say to God, your will be done, and the other to which God says to them, your will be done. He gives everyone what they ask for.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to share with you the questions I'm going to go through. We're not going to get through them all tonight for sure. We may get through one more. But I just want to give you some things to be thinking about so we can be ready to talk about it on Wednesday. The first one, before you respond, let me go through all of them. Are we any better than those that are described in verses 18 through 32? Why or why not? The second one, can we personally embrace unrighteousness or commit a sin without first suppressing truth? To me, that's a real scary thought. Can we take on sin on a personal level without first suppressing truth? And then, is it possible that we are victims of suppression sometimes, of the suppression of truth? You know, maybe it's not that we're always actively suppressing it. Maybe we're victims of that. How does that look? How does that happen in the world today? How is the truth suppressed? What's more important? Knowing the truth or loving the truth? This is another one that grips me a bit and sends shivers down my spine some. Is any sin worse than others? How does Paul, in particular, describe the sin of homosexuality? Again, I want to remind us, if we're not ashamed of the gospel, we have to acknowledge everything Paul says here. And we can't mince words. We can't sugarcoat things. So what does Paul say about this? How does he describe it? And how might we become guilty of approving of those who live in sin? So those are a few of the questions I want to take us through. And I think all that we're going to be able to get through tonight probably is the first one. Are we any better than those who are described here? Why or why not? So this warrants having a microphone if you want to raise your hand and offer up. Get Tamara and then Amy. Get 2 comments.
I think we're just as capable as making their choices, but hopefully we're better in that we see the fault in it and we're seeking what his will is and not our own.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's God. It's God that's better. It's God that's going to make us whole if we acknowledge that. But no, we're not better.
Okay.
It's just we acknowledge that we need him, that we need salvation, like basically what she's saying.
Okay. All right, we're going to have to close with that for now, so I apologize for not being able to get through more of this tonight. I'm going to share a couple of readings with you, too, on Wednesday. One from an observer who came here from Russia in the 70s. And very convicting, what he saw in the Western world, in America in particular. And then I also want to read a little excerpt from C.S. Lewis. I'm a big fan of the Chronicles of Narnia. He paints vivid imagery. And he has a great image of the truth being suppressed in his book, The Silver Chair, which, if you as parents have not read the books to your kids, I would highly, highly recommend read the Chronicles of Narnia. I'll tell you, I got way more out of it than my kids did. There's so much beautiful imagery there. All right, well, thank you, everybody.